The sun broke over the Arizona territory like a judgment. It came up hard and fast, a raw, bloody smear against a purple sky, chasing the last of the night's chill. Far off, a lone coyote yelped, the sound thin and sharp in the vast quiet. The light hit the mesas, painting them in shades of rust and cruel gold, and illuminated the dust kicked up by the wagon train. The wagons groaned, their wheels complaining against the packed earth. They were moving toward a smudge on the horizon called Sagebrush Crossing. Inside one of the heavier wagons, Lena Hart held tight to the bouncing seat and tighter still to the small leather valise on her lap. Her knuckles were white. The valise was all that mattered of her old life. In it, packed tight, were 3 heavy medical texts, a roll of carbolic bandages, a tin of laudanum, and, wrapped in oilcloth, a stack of letters from her father, held together by a faded blue ribbon. She was running from the damp, civilized rot of Boston, from the memory of her father's name being whispered with pity and scorn, from a life that had become a gilded cage. She had told herself she wanted freedom, a place to be useful, a place to start over where the Hart name meant nothing. But as she looked out at the endless, sun-baked landscape, a different kind of fear settled in. This was not freedom. This was an ocean of dirt and rock. And she did not know how to swim. She knew how to set a bone, how to suture a wound, how to identify scarlet fever. She did not know how to face this heat, this dust, this crushing emptiness. Sagebrush Crossing was not so much a town as an argument with the desert, a single main street, wide and ankle-deep in filth, cut between 2 rows of false-fronted buildings. The saloon, the church, the sheriff's office, a general store, and at the far end, looking grim and permanent, the low adobe walls of a small United States Army fort. The air itself felt wrong. It was thick with more than just dust. Lena felt the stares as the wagon rolled to a stop. Men in worn denim watched from the saloon porch, their eyes flat. Women in faded calico hurried past, pulling their children close. Soldiers in dusty blue uniforms moved with a restless, arrogant energy. And lingering near the livery, a small group of Mexican vaqueros and a few silent, watchful indigenous men, their faces unreadable. There was tension, tight as a fiddle string. She had heard whispers at the last way station. Apache. The word was spoken like a curse. Stories of a raiding party, of wagons burned and families taken. The stories were always the same, and they were always told by one side. A large woman with a face like a weathered apple and iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun marched up to the wagon. She carried a ledger. "You, the schoolteacher," she boomed. Her voice was pure pragmatism. "And the nurse," Lena said, climbing down stiffly. "Miss Hart, Martha Ellison," the woman said, making a check in her ledger. "I run the boarding house. Figured you were one and the same. We ain't got room for 2 new women." She eyed Lena's valise. "You look like you might break in a stiff wind. This ain't Boston." "I am aware," Lena said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Good. Pay is $20 a month, room and board included, provided you also tend to my boarders when they get snake bit or shot, which they do. Your room is small, the water's often brown. Questions?" Lena shook her head. Martha Ellison grunted, a sound of grim approval, and pointed toward a clean but severe-looking building. "Then get your things. Supper is at 6. Be on time." Lena found her room, washed the grit from her face, and then, needing to feel the ground under her feet, she walked. She passed the sheriff's office. A man stood outside, polishing a rifle. He was lean, with dark skin and a thick, drooping mustache. He wore a tin star, but he looked more like a rancher than a lawman. He met her gaze, nodded once, and said nothing. That must be Sheriff Tom Reyes, a man, she had heard, who walked a fine line with his Mexican heritage, trying to keep a lid on a pot that was always threatening to boil over. She heard the organ music from the small church and saw a tall, thin man in black robes outside, arguing with a soldier. Father O'Leary, the Irish priest, his face red with frustration, trying to balance the word of God with the demands of the army. She stepped into the general store to buy a bar of soap, and the air thickened with cigar smoke and whiskey fumes from the adjoining saloon. She kept her eyes down, but she could not help but hear the conversation. "Briggs is gonna clean him out this time," a cowboy said, his voice loud. "Heard he's bringing in another 2 companies. "He ain't gonna do nothing," another voice scoffed. "Not while his pet Indian is leading him on a goose chase." "You mean the ghost? That's him? Taza. Heard he's half-blood. He ain't truly Apache, and he damn sure ain't white." "He's dangerous, that one," a soldier's voice cut in. "Killed more men, white and red, than I've had hot meals. He works for the army, takes our coin, but I wouldn't turn my back on him. No, sir. The Apache call him a traitor," the first cowboy said. "We call him a savage." Man belongs to nobody. A phantom. That's why they call him the ghost. He's there one minute, gone the next. Lena paid for her soap and left, the name Taza echoing in her mind. A man who belonged to no one. She understood that feeling. The town, she was learning, was run by the shadow of the fort, and the fort was run by Colonel Briggs. She saw him later that day, riding down the main street. He was a handsome man in a clean, pressed uniform, with silver hair and a polite, civilized smile. He tipped his hat to her, an officer and a gentleman. But she had heard the whispers about him, too. He was here to protect the settlers. Yes, but he was also here to clear the land. A railroad was coming. Surveyors had been seen up in the canyons, the same canyons the Apache held sacred. There were rumors of silver, of copper. Colonel Briggs, for all his polished manners, saw the land and its people as obstacles to be managed or removed. That night, in her small, clean room, Lena untied the blue ribbon. She pulled out the top letter. It was one of her father's last articles, one he never published. It was about a group of politicians and factory owners in Boston who had diverted city funds, letting a tenement burn and killing a dozen people, all to protect their profits. He had been killed for that kind of truth, struck down in an alley by a robber who took nothing. Lena held the brittle paper, her father's neat, angry script blurring through her tears. She had his sense of justice, a stubborn, unyielding core that demanded things be right. But she was also a woman of her time, raised in the East, and she carried the prejudices she had been taught. Indian savages, she had heard the stories. She looked out her window at the dark, alien shape of the mountains. She was so sure the stories were one-sided. But what if they were not? What if the savages were real a few days later? She saw him. She was walking near the edge of town, just past the livery, where the street dissolved back into the desert. A small group of riders approached. They were not soldiers. They were Apache. They rode with a stillness that was unnerving, their lean bodies seeming to grow right out of the horses. One man rode slightly ahead. He was not like the others. He wore buckskin pants, but also a worn cavalry shirt, stripped of its insignia. His black hair was held back by a simple band. He sat on his horse with an arrogant, boneless grace. As they passed, his head turned. He was not supposed to see her. She was just a woman in a gray dress, another piece of the town. But his eyes found hers. It was not a glance. It was an assessment. He saw her. All of her, the newness, the fear, the Eastern softness. He saw it all in one long, unsettling second. She saw him, too. She had expected a monster, a savage. She saw a man whose face was a mask of cold control, but whose eyes held something ancient and dangerous, and, buried deep, a profound, chilling calm. Then he was past. Pet Indian, a soldier, shouted from the saloon porch, emboldened by whiskey. "How many of your own brothers did you sell today?" "Taza." The lead rider did not stop, did not turn his head. He just kept riding, his back straight, as if the soldier was nothing more than a barking dog. He and his men disappeared into the heat shiver, vanishing as quickly as they had arrived. The half-blood ghost. Lena stood frozen, her heart hammering. The town was afraid of Apache raids. The Apache were afraid of losing their ancestral homes, the very canyons where the railroad men were drawing their lines. The army and the unseen men with their money back east wanted the land, and it did not matter who died to get it. And she, Lena Hart was standing right in the middle of it, an outsider, a woman with a valise full of bandages and her father's dangerous sense of justice. She had come west seeking a new life, and she had a terrible, sinking feeling that she had just found it. It had been 3 weeks. Lena Hart had settled into the rhythm of Sagebrush Crossing, and it was a harsh one. She taught arithmetic to 12 children in the mornings, half of them white, half of them Mexican, and all of them suspicious of her Eastern vowels. In the afternoons, she was the nurse. She had lanced boils, set a cowboy's broken leg, and sat with a young woman who had lost her baby to the fever. She had earned a grudging half-ounce of respect. She was washing the grit from her face at the boarding house when Sheriff Tom Reyes found her. He stood on the porch, his hat in his hands, his face a map of worry. "Miss Hart," he said, not meeting her eyes, "I got a favor to ask, a hard one." She dried her hands on her apron. "What is it, Sheriff?" "There's a mining camp up on Skeleton Ridge. Maybe 10 men. They got a bad sickness. Their last man rode in this morning, half dead himself. Said they're burning up with fever. They need quinine and laudanum. They cannot come to us." "You want me to go," she said. It was not a question. "A supply wagon is heading that way with powder and tools. It's the only way to get the medicine there." He finally looked at her. "I would not ask, but you are the only one here who knows what to do with that medicine." Lena nodded. This was why she had come. "I will pack my valise." The trip required the approval of the Army. The ridge was in disputed territory. Lena found Colonel Briggs in his office at the fort, the walls covered with maps. He was, as always, polite, his silver hair immaculate. "Miss Hart," he said, standing. "A commendable act of charity. Truly." He steepled his fingers, his eyes thoughtful. "But the territory is unsettled. There are hostile elements. Sheriff Reyes believes it is necessary." "Colonel," she said. "And so it is," he smiled, a tight, controlled expression. "I will not deny a request for mercy, but I must insist you take an escort. For your protection, of course." He turned to his adjutant. "We are stretched thin. I'm afraid. The patrols are extensive, but Sergeant Hale is a very capable man. See that he and 4 men are outfitted to accompany Miss Hart and the supply wagon. 4 should be sufficient." A prickle of unease ran down Lena's spine. 4 men, to guard a wagon of blasting powder and medicine in hostile territory. As she left the office, she saw a man waiting outside. A rough man in worn buckskins, his face shadowed by a low-brimmed hat. He carried 2 pistols, and his eyes, cold and blue, scanned everything. He looked like a wolf waiting to be fed. He nodded to Briggs's adjutant and spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. Lena recognized him from the saloon gossip. Clay Maddox, a man who did the Army's dirtiest work. She watched him follow the adjutant back into the colonel's office, and the feeling of unease solidified into a small, hard knot of fear. The wagon groaned out of town the next morning, just after dawn. Sergeant Hale rode point, a grim man of 40 who said nothing. The 4 young soldiers seemed nervous, their eyes constantly scanning the high rocks. Lena sat on the wagon bench, her valise at her feet, the sun already a hot promise on the horizon. For 5 hours, they moved through the heat and dust. The only sound was the jingle of harness, the creak of the wheels, and the click of shod hooves on stone. The landscape grew meaner, the flat desert giving way to tight, winding canyons. The air grew still. They entered a narrow pass, the red rock walls rising hundreds of feet on either side, barely 20 feet apart. Skeleton Ridge. It was well named. The first shot was a sharp, flat crack. It was not a boom, but a thwack. The lead driver, a man named Peters, grunted, a red flower blooming on his chest. He slumped over the reins. "Ambush!" Sergeant Hale bellowed, drawing his pistol just as a second shot took him from the saddle. Hell opened. Gunfire rained down from the rocks above. The horses screamed, rearing in their traces, blind with panic. The wagon lurched, slamming Lena against the sideboard. She was thrown into the bed, landing hard among the crates of quinine and blasting powder. She heard the soldiers shouting, returning fire. Their pistols sounded like children's toys against the roar of the rifles from above. She crawled to the back of the wagon and peered out. One soldier was down, his face in the dirt. Another was trying to fire from behind a dead mule. A third, a boy from Ohio she had shared coffee with, was hit in the gut. He fell to his knees, his hands clutching his stomach, his eyes wide with a terrible, uncomprehending surprise. "Billy!" she screamed. Her fear vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. She grabbed her valise and scrambled out of the wagon. Keeping low, bullets whined past her, chipping the rock. She reached the boy. "Hold still, son," she whispered, her hands shaking so violently she could barely unlatch her bag. "Hold still. I have got you." He was gurgling, blood on his lips. She tore open a bandage, trying to apply pressure, trying to do the impossible. She looked up, desperate, scanning the ridge where the shots were coming from. She needed to see the enemy. She saw him. He was on a ledge, not 50 yards up. He was reloading a large rifle. He wore a stained leather headband with a single hawk feather. Apache. But as he turned to ram the cartridge home, the sun caught his face. His beard was thick and red. His skin was, beneath the dirt and sweat, white. Lena froze. It made no sense. She looked again. Another attacker moved on the ledge. He was wearing Apache leggings and a vest. But beneath it, she saw the unmistakable blue of a cavalry shirt. And she saw his face. It was Clay Maddox, the man from the fort. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This was wrong. This was all wrong. The shooting slowed. The last soldier behind the mule was silent. It was just her, the dying boy, and the sound of his ragged breathing. She heard a scrape of boots on gravel. A man stepped around the front of the wagon. He was one of the attackers, his face smeared with crude paint. He, too, was white. He held a long knife. He saw her. He smiled, his teeth yellow and rotten. "Well, looky here. A witness. Briggs said no survivors." He raised the knife. Lena opened her mouth to scream, but the air was gone from her lungs. A shadow fell from the rocks on the other side of the pass. It was Taza. He moved with a speed that was not human. He was on the attacker before the man could even turn. There was no sound, no shout, just a liquid, horrifying thud. Taza's own knife was buried in the man's throat. The attacker gurgled, dropping his own weapon, his hands flying to his neck. He fell, twitching. Taza stood over the body, his chest heaving. He looked at Lena. It was the same face she had seen in the street. Cold, controlled, dangerous. He pulled his knife free and calmly wiped it on the dead man's shirt. Gunfire erupted again. Taza looked up. Maddox and his men had seen him. They were firing at him now. Taza lunged, grabbing Lena's arm. His grip was a band of steel. She cried out in pain. "If you want to live," he commanded, his voice a low, urgent rasp. "Come with me, now." He did not wait for an answer. He pulled her, yanking her from the side of the dying soldier. "No, I cannot," she stammered, but he was already dragging her toward the canyon wall. "He is dead. You will be, too." He shoved her toward a crack in the rock, a path she would never have seen. "Climb." They were scrambling, her hands raw on the stone, her long skirts tearing on the brush. A bullet chipped the rock 2 inches from her head, showering her with dust. She whimpered. "Be quiet," he ordered. "Climb." He was above her, pulling her by the arm. She looked back, down into the canyon. She saw Maddox's men, the white men in paint, swarming the wagon. They were not just shooting, they were scalping the dead soldiers. "My God," she whispered. "Climb," Taza said again, and pulled her over a final ledge. They were in a shallow cave, a small alcove hidden by a curtain of ancient, dry brush. She collapsed onto the dusty floor, her lungs burning, her body shaking in great, uncontrollable spasms. Her hands were scraped and bleeding. Taza did not look at her. He stood at the mouth of the cave, a ghost in the shadows, watching the scene below. He was perfectly still. After a long minute, he turned. He looked at her, huddled on the ground, a mess of torn fabric and fear. He saw her bleeding hands. He moved toward her. She flinched, scrambling back against the rock. He stopped, his face impassive. "You are shaking like a rabbit," he said. His voice was not cruel, just flat, a statement of fact. They were Apache," she stammered, fumbling in her valise for a clean bandage. Her hands were useless. "No," Taza said. "I saw them," she insisted, her voice rising. "The paint, the headbands, the scalping." "You saw white men," he said, turning his back to her again. "Watching. Mercenaries. Hired by your colonel. Dressed to look like my people." Lena froze. The world stopped spinning and then reformed itself into a new, hideous shape. Why? Taza looked at her over his shoulder. "Why do your people do anything for money? For the land?" He turned fully, his dark eyes pinning her to the stone. "Your Colonel Briggs wants a war. He wants to clear the canyons for the Iron Horse. But he needs a reason. A good one. He needs savage Apache to attack a medicine wagon. He needs a massacre." Lena thought of the 4 soldiers, the small escort, the strange, cold meeting with Maddox, Briggs's polished, civilized smile. "He sent us," she whispered, the horror rising in her throat. "He sent me. He used me as bait." "You were the proof," Taza said. "A dead white woman, a teacher, a nurse. The town would have screamed for blood. My blood, the blood of my people." Lena looked at the man who had saved her, the man her world called a savage, a traitor. He had just saved her from her own kind. She realized the truth. If she died here, the story was set. Apache attack kills beloved schoolteacher. If she lived, and she went back, who would she tell who would ever believe her story over the word of a decorated colonel? "Who are you?" she asked. The question far deeper than his name. "I am the man who just saved your life," Taza said, his voice quiet. "And I am the man your colonel wants to hang. Now, be silent. They are still hunting." Lena ripped a piece of bandage with her teeth, her hands suddenly steady. She rapped her bleeding knuckles, the pain a sharp, clear anchor in the spinning chaos. She had come west to escape a lie, only to be used as the centerpiece for a new one. She had to choose. The system that had murdered her father and just tried to murder her. Or this dangerous man, this enemy, who had, for some reason, told her the truth. She woke to the smell of cedar smoke and roasting meat. Her first thought was of the cave. Her second was that the floor was no longer cold stone. She was lying on a bed of soft furs, and the air was warm. She opened her eyes. She was not in the cave. She was in a small, dome-shaped structure made of branches and animal hides. Sunlight streamed in through a single opening. A woman with a face like a carved map of the desert sat near the entrance, weaving a basket, her hands moving with a blur of practiced speed. The woman did not look at her, but she knew, with absolute certainty, that the woman was aware of her every breath. Lena sat up slowly. Her body ached. Her hands were bandaged with clean, soft buckskin. Someone had tended to her wounds while she slept. She looked down. Her torn, bloody dress was gone. In its place, she was wearing a simple, long tunic of tanned deer hide. It was soft against her skin. She felt a flush of violation, then confusion. Her valise was on the floor beside the furs, unopened. The woman at the door grunted, a sound, and gestured with her head. Lena pulled herself stiffly to her feet. She stepped out of the dwelling, into the full, blinding light. She was in a hidden valley, a green slash of cottonwoods and willow cut deep into the red rock. A stream gurgled nearby. Dozens of structures like the one she had left were scattered beneath the trees. This was not a war party. It was a village. Children laughed and shouted, chasing a stray dog. Women worked hides, ground corn, and tended to bubbling pots over open fires. Men spoke in low, quiet tones, mending tack or fletching arrows. It was the most peaceful, vibrant place she had seen since coming west, and she was its prisoner. Taza was waiting for her. He stood next to an old man whose face was so lined with age and wisdom that he seemed a part of the landscape itself. "You are safe," Taza said. His voice was flat, as it had been in the cave. "This is the rancheria of my people. You are our guest, but you are not free to leave." The old man stepped forward. He was shorter than Taza, but he carried an authority that needed no height. His eyes were dark, not with anger, but with a deep, bottomless knowing. "I am Nantan," the old man said, his voice a dry rustle, like wind through corn husks. You have brought a great shadow to our home, white woman." "I did not ask to be brought," Lena said, her voice shaking but defiant. "No," Nantan agreed. "You did not." A group of warriors approached, their faces hard. One, a tall man with a fresh scar across his jaw, spat on the ground at Lena's feet. He spoke to Taza in a torrent of harsh, angry Apache. Lena did not need to understand the words. She understood the hate. Taza stood impassive, letting the man finish. The warrior finally shoved Taza's shoulder. "He calls you a traitor," Lena whispered, shocked. "He is not wrong," Taza said quietly, never taking his eyes from the other warrior. Then Taza spoke. He spoke in Apache, his voice low but carrying. It was not the voice of a supplicant. It was the voice of a man stating a case. He spoke for a long time. He pointed, not at Lena, but back toward the canyon, toward the world of the Pinda Lake Oyi, the White Eyes. When he finished, a heavy silence fell over the camp. "What did you tell them?" Lena asked. "I told them what you saw," Taza said. "I told them white men came in our paint to murder your soldiers. I told them this woman," he gestured to her, "is not a prisoner. She is a witness. She is the only weapon we have that is not an arrow." The scarred warrior looked at Lena with new eyes, not with kindness, but with a cold, calculating interest. Nantan raised a hand. The warriors, even the angry one, fell silent. The old chief looked at Lena, his gaze seeming to penetrate her very bones. He was weighing her soul. "3 sons," Nantan said. "You will stay. You will eat our food and drink our water. You will see how we live. After 3 sons, you will make a choice." "A choice?" Lena asked. "You will return to your town and tell your people the truth you saw, or you will stay here as a bridge for our people." "And if I tell them," Lena said, her voice small, "and they do not believe me?" "Then you will have done what you could," Nantan said. "But if your people will not listen, our path will be only of the spear." He turned and walked away, his bare feet making no sound on the packed earth. Lena was given back to the care of the old woman, whose name was Sansi. She was given stew in a flat, warm bread. She ate, her hunger a desperate animal need. She was a hostage, treated with the formal, correct respect of Apache law. That night, she could not sleep. She sat in the entrance of the Wikiyup, looking at the stars. They were brighter here, colder. She thought of her father. She thought of the men in Boston, the men with polite smiles and ledgers, who had signed a paper that led to a dozen deaths in a tenement fire. Colonel Briggs was no different. His polished uniform and silver hair were just a different kind of disguise. The pattern was the same: greed, lies, murder, and she was in the middle. If she stayed here, she would be safe. But what would happen to the Apache if she went back? She remembered the soldiers' sneer in the street. Pet Indian. They would call her worse. They would call her a traitor, a liar, a whore. They would say she had been ruined, her mind broken by the savages. Her fear was a cold, hard knot in her stomach. "You look at the stars as if they have the answers." Taza's voice came from the darkness. He was just there, a shadow detaching itself from other shadows. He sat on the ground a few feet away. "They are better company than my thoughts," she said. They sat in silence for a long time. "Why did you save me?" she finally asked. "You work for the army. You are their scout." Taza picked up a stick, his long fingers tracing its grain in the firelight from the center of the camp. "I do not work for the army," he said, his voice low and bitter. "I work for my people." He looked at her, and for the first time, the mask of control slipped. She saw a deep, burning pain. I was at San Carlos. The white men called it a reservation. It was a prison. I was a boy. I watched my sister's baby die, not from a bullet, from the white man's sickness in the lungs, from the bad flour and the rotten meat. I watched them die, one by one, until there was no one left to cry. He snapped the stick in two, his knuckles white. So I made a choice. I would be their pet Indian. I would be the half-blood ghost. I take their money. I lead their patrols on chases for ghosts. I tell them the warriors are here, when I know they are there. I have kept my people safe for 3 years by being a traitor to them. He looked at her. I saved you because I knew what Maddox was doing. I knew Briggs was setting a trap. I did not know you would be the bait. Lena felt a sudden, strange kinship with this man. A man caught between two worlds, just as she was. My father was killed, she said, her voice quiet. Back in Boston. He was a journalist. He found out that powerful men were stealing money. Their greed caused a fire that killed a dozen people. He was going to publish the story. He was found in an alley. They called it a robbery. They said he was drunk. He was neither. Taza looked at her, his head tilted. So you understand. A lie can be a sharper blade than any knife. I understand, she said. The next night, the wind changed. The air grew thick and yellow. A low, howling moan began in the high rocks. Sansi, the old woman, barked an order at Lena. She pointed to the wickiup skins, then to the ropes. A wall of brown dust, 1,000 feet high, rolled into the valley. The sandstorm hit them like a physical blow. It was a nightmare of screaming wind and stinging sand. The air was so thick, she could not breathe. Lena, her eyes and mouth full of grit, did as she was told. She pulled on ropes alongside the Apache women, tying down the hide shelters, gathering the terrified children, huddling with them behind a windbreak of boulders. She was not a hostage. She was just another pair of hands against the rage of the desert. The storm lasted for hours. When it finally passed, leaving a strange, bruised purple sky. The camp was half buried in sand, but it had held. Sansi gave Lena a gourd of water, and then a small, cracked-toothed smile. It was a victory. Taza found her, as she was shaking the sand from a blanket. The desert teaches you who is real, he said, looking at the transformed landscape. The wind does not listen to lies. The third day was clear and still. The camp was alive with the work of rebuilding. Lena found herself watching Taza. He was not with the warriors. He was with a small group of boys, none older than 8. He was showing them how to fletch an arrow, his large, scarred hands moving with gentle, surprising precision. A small boy, frustrated, threw his arrow to the ground. Taza picked it up. He crouched down, speaking in a low, soft voice, his hand on the boy's shoulder. He even smiled, a small, barely visible lifting of his mouth. He was not just the ghost. He was not just a warrior. He was a man trying to hold his world together with his bare hands. An attraction, small and tentative, stirred in her. It was not just his strength or the startling, savage beauty of his face. It was his stillness, his hidden gentleness. It was a terrifying, dangerous feeling. That evening, the air was clean. They sat by a small fire, away from the others. The silence between them was different now. It was not empty. It was full of the things they had not said. On the morning of the 4th day, she woke before the sun. She knew her answer. She found Nantan at the stream, greeting the dawn. I will go back, she said. He nodded, as if he had known all along. The white man's ears are often closed by greed, he said, his voice full of a sadness that felt ancient. But you must speak. It is your path. Taza was waiting, a short distance away. He had 2 horses, saddled and ready. Her own valise was tied behind one of the saddles. I will take you to the edge of the town, Taza said. It is not safe for me to go closer. I know, she said. She mounted the horse, the deer-hide tunic strange under her hands, which were now healed. She looked back at the hidden village. 3 days ago, she would have called them savages. Now, she knew they were just people, fighting for their homes. She turned her horse and followed Taza, riding out of the hidden valley, back toward the world of lies. She was no longer the same woman who had left Sagebrush Crossing. She was a witness. They stopped on a low rise a mile from town. The cluster of buildings looked small and fragile under the enormous sky. "This is as far as I go," Taza said. He swung down from his horse. Lena dismounted, her legs unsteady. She was still wearing the soft deer-hide tunic. Her own dress and valise were in a bundle Taza handed to her. "What will you do?" she asked, her voice low. "I will watch," he said. "Your colonel will not be happy to see you alive. He will try to silence you. Be the rabbit, not the wolf. Be small, be quiet, but keep your eyes open." "And you?" "I am the ghost," he said, a flicker of that cold smile returning. "I am not here." He touched the neck of his horse, and before she could say more, he had turned the animal and was gone. He did not ride. He melted back into the rocks in the heat's shimmer, vanishing in a way that made her question if he had ever been there at all. Lena took a deep breath. She changed behind a boulder, the familiar, constricting fabric of her Boston dress feeling like a suit of armor and a cage all at once. She packed the tunic away. She picked up her valise and began the long, hot walk to town. She entered Main Street from the south. The first person to see her was a mule skinner, who dropped the barrel he was loading. He stared. His mouth opened. "My God," he whispered. "It's the teacher." The cry went up. "It's Miss Hart. She's alive." People poured from the saloon, the general store. Martha Ellison ran onto the porch of the boarding house, her face a mask of shock. And then the mood turned. They saw she was alone, on foot, her face streaked with dirt. But she was unharmed. She was not crying. She was not running. She was walking, her head high. The whispers started before she had even reached the halfway point. "Where's the wagon? Where's the soldiers?" "She was with them. 3 days. Look at her. She ain't been harmed. Not a scratch. Must have made a deal." A woman's voice, sharp and cruel, cut through the others. "An Indian's woman now, I reckon." Lena flinched as if she had been slapped. The faces that had, 3 days ago, offered her a grudging respect were now cold with suspicion and a dark, hungry curiosity. She was no longer a victim. She was a spectacle, a defiled thing. As she reached the center of town, a patrol of soldiers clattered down the street, led by Colonel Briggs himself. He pulled his horse up short, his face a perfect performance of astonished joy. "Miss Hart," he boomed, swinging down from his saddle. "It is a miracle we feared the worst. We were just organizing a patrol to recover your body." He strode toward her, his hands outstretched as if to an angel. "Thank God you are safe. I am alive, Colonel," Lena said, her voice clear and cold. She did not take his hands. "But your soldiers are not—" A hush fell over the street. Briggs's smile tightened by a fraction of an inch. "Yes," he said, his voice lowering to a tone of practiced grief. "A terrible, terrible tragedy. A brutal, savage attack. We found the wagon, what was left of it." He looked at her with deep, feigned concern. "But you, my dear, how did you escape? Where have you been these past 3 days?" "I was not attacked by Apache, Colonel," Lena said, her voice ringing in the silence. Briggs froze. "What?" "The men who attacked the wagon," Lena said. "The men who murdered Sergeant Hale and your soldiers. They were white men. I saw them." The crowd gasped. Briggs' face went from concerned to thunderous, but he controlled it instantly, replacing it with a look of paternal pity. "Miss Hart," he said, his voice soft, "you have endured an unspeakable trauma. Your mind, it is playing tricks on you. The shock—" "I am not in shock, Colonel," she insisted, her voice rising. "I saw them. They were wearing Apache headbands. Yes, but they were white men. One of them had a red beard. One of them I recognized." "This is madness," Briggs said, shaking his head. "Is it—" A slow, greasy voice drawled from the crowd. Clay Maddox pushed his way to the front, his thumbs hooked in his gun belt. He smirked at Lena, his eyes lingering on her body with an insolent familiarity. "Sounds to me," Maddox said to the crowd. Like the lady's been listening to her new friend, the one who brought her back. What do you mean? A man shouted. I mean, I saw tracks, Maddox said, spitting. Apache tracks, a single rider, coming from the direction of town, meeting her out on the flats. Looks to me like she's been with that ghost, Taza, and he's been filling her head with lies. He turned his cold blue eyes on Lena. Ain't that right? Miss, you been with that half-breed scout, the one who supposedly works for the army but just happened to be the only one to find you. Sounds like a setup to me. Sounds like Taza wanted that wagon hit, and you're his little mouthpiece. The crowd turned. The suspicion became open accusation. Taza had set up the attack. Lena was his pawn, or his lover. It made a sick, perfect sense to them. That is a lie, Lena cried out. Enough, Briggs roared, his authority settling over the crowd. He put a hand on Lena's shoulder. She tried to pull away, but his grip was iron. This woman is a hero, and she is in my protection, he announced. She is clearly unwell, confused by her ordeal. What she needs is rest and safety. She will stay at the fort until she has recovered. He did not look at her. He looked at the crowd, the perfect picture of a commander taking control. Maddox, my office. We will find out who is responsible for these lies. It was a perfect political maneuver. He had dismissed her testimony as hysteria, implicated his own scout Taza, and taken her into protective custody, all in one breath. Colonel, I will not, Lena said, trying to pull free. You will, Miss Hart, he said, his voice a low. Steel command meant only for her. You are a civilian witness under military protection. Do not make me arrest you. He steered her toward the fort, the crowd parting before them. Lena caught Martha Ellison's eye. The older woman's face was unreadable, a mask of grim practicality. She looked away. Lena was a prisoner once more. Her room at the fort was not a cell. It was a comfortable guest quarter, with a clean bed and a locked door. A soldier stood guard outside. Later that evening, Sheriff Tom Reyes came to see her. The soldier outside was hesitant, but the sheriff's badge still meant something. Reyes closed the door quietly. He held his hat in his hands, just as he had when he had asked her to go. Miss Hart, he said, his voice rough with an emotion she could not place. Are you well? I'm a prisoner. Sheriff, she said. He says it's for your protection. He is a liar. Reyes met her gaze. His dark eyes were filled with a deep, weary sadness. I have been sheriff here for 10 years, he said. I know a lie when I hear one, and I know a man like Briggs. He has the law on his side, the written law. I only have what is right, and it is not enough. So you believe me, she whispered. I believe what I saw in your eyes, señorita, and I believe what I see in his. He looked at the locked door. The army's power is absolute here. My badge stops at that fort's gate. I cannot get you out. Then what can you do? I can listen, he said. And I can be ready. Briggs and his man Maddox, they are not as smart as they think. They will make a mistake. You be the rabbit, like the Apache say. You be small. You watch, I will do the same. He left her, and she felt a small, hard kernel of hope. She was not completely alone. 2 nights later, she was staring out her barred window at the moonlit parade ground when she heard a sound, a pebble, hitting the glass. She looked down. A shadow was pressed against the adobe wall of the stables, a place the sentry on the wall could not see. It was Taza. Her heart leaped into her throat. He had walked into the lion's den. He gestured, a quick, sharp motion. The stables. Now. She looked at her door. Locked. She looked at the window. The bars were thick. She looked back down. He was gone. She had to think. She went to the door and beat on it. Guard, guard! The soldier unbarred it, annoyed. What is it, miss? It is. I am unwell, she stammered, holding her stomach. I am going to be sick. It must have been the food. The soldier's face was a mix of embarrassment and disgust. I need air, she pleaded. Please, just to the porch. I cannot breathe in here. The colonel's orders. The colonel will have my vomit on his floor if you do not let me out, she snapped, her voice pure Boston ice. The soldier, a boy of no more than 19, relented. All right, miss, to the porch. But I am right here. She walked onto the porch, gulping the cool night air, playing the part of the frail, sick woman. The soldier stood 10 feet away, watching her. The stables were 100 feet away, across the open parade ground. She could not possibly make it. She leaned against a post, pretending to be dizzy. She waited. A commotion came from the front gate, shouting, "Fire, fire in the sutler's tent!" The guard's head snapped around. "Stay here, miss," he commanded, and ran toward the gate to help. The moment he was gone, Lena darted from the porch, keeping low, a gray shadow in the moonlight. She slipped through the stable doors, her heart hammering so hard she thought it would burst. The stables smelled of hay and manure. "In here." His voice came from the blackness of an empty stall. She stumbled in, and he pulled her against the wall. He put a hand over her mouth, not to hurt her, but to keep her silent. He was so close. She could feel the heat of his body, the scent of cedar smoke and the desert clinging to him. "The fire," she whispered, when he took his hand away. "A small one," he said. "It will not last." "You are insane to be here." "I am here for you," he said. "I knew he would lock you up. You are the only one who can tell the truth." "He has. And the town, they think I am your whore." The word tasted like ash on her tongue. His body went rigid. That is the story he wants. It is an easy story for them to believe. He paused. "We need proof. Words are wind. We need paper." Paper. Briggs is a soldier. He keeps records. He has a list of the men he pays. Maddox, the others. He has letters from the railroad men. This proof will be in his office. His office is guarded day and night. It is impossible. Nothing is impossible, Taza said. You are on the inside. You are the rabbit. Watch him. Learn his habits. Find the paper. I will... Stay close. You cannot get back out. They will have doubled the guard. I am not going back out, Taza said. He pointed up. I am going up. She looked. A hayloft door was open to the night sky, a perfect square of stars. Taza, no, she said, grabbing his arm. The muscle was hard as rock. You will be caught. I am the ghost, he said. And for the first time, his voice was not cold. It was almost gentle. He thinks he has you in a cage, but he has just put his witness next to his secrets. Be smart. Lena Hart. He put his hand on the stall wall and, with a silent, fluid motion, vaulted up into the loft. She heard a faint rustle of hay, and then nothing. She slipped back out of the stables. The fire was already out. The guard was jogging back, his face red. My apologies, miss, he panted. You all right? I am fine now, Lena said, her voice smooth as silk. I think I will return to my room. She walked back to her prison, but she was no longer a prisoner. She was a spy. The next few days were a quiet, terrible war. Lena was the perfect captive. She was polite, quiet, and seemingly broken. She ate the food Briggs sent her. She read the Bible he provided. She also learned. She learned the guard changed every 4 hours. She learned Colonel Briggs left his office every day at precisely noon for his lunch, and again at 5 for his evening whiskey. His adjutant, a nervous young man, held the only other key, and the town's coldness became her armor. She was allowed to restart her school, but she had to hold it inside the fort. Only the soldiers' children and 3 children of the town's most prominent merchant attended. The Mexican children and the 2 half-Apache children were no longer welcome. The divide was now a wall. The whispers followed her. 4 days in the savage camp. She looks pale. I heard she's carrying his child. Lena let them talk. She smiled her pale, one smile, and she watched. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that Briggs was not finished. The letters that arrived by armed courier, The long, closed-door meetings with Maddox. He was planning his next move. He had to... The railroad was impatient. She and Taza were no longer just trying to clear his name. They were in a race, and the prize was the survival of an entire people. Lena was the rabbit. She played the part perfectly. For a week, she was the fort's quiet, broken creature. She taught the 3 children their letters. She was polite to the soldiers. She was obedient to Colonel Briggs, who treated her with a cloying, paternal solicitude that made her skin crawl. She was the very picture of a traumatized woman, grateful for her rescuer. And she watched, she knew, from the single pebble Taza had tossed against her window 3 nights after their meeting, that he had escaped the fort. He was back in the shadows, waiting. But she was still caged, and they had no proof. Her opportunity came not from a soldier, but from the church. Father O'Leary, his face a roadmap of Irish worry, came to the fort. "Colonel," he said, his voice carrying to Lena on the porch, "it is a matter of charity. We are sorting the Relief Society's donations, and poor Martha Ellison cannot read the ledgers. Miss Hart is a woman of letters. It would be a service to God, and perhaps a comfort to her, to do some useful work." Briggs, ever the civilized man, could not refuse a priest. "Of course, Father. A capital idea. It will do her good to be among the decent folk of the town." He turned to Lena. "An escort will take you, my dear, and bring you back before sundown." It was not a release. It was a longer leash. The church rectory was a small, cluttered room behind the sanctuary, smelling of beeswax and old paper. Martha Ellison was there, looking as stern as ever, a mountain of ledgers on a table. "He let you out. Then," Martha said, not looking up, "Good. You can handle the township maps." "Father O'Leary thinks they are donation records. They are not." Lena's hands stilled. "What are they, land claims?" Martha said, her voice flat. "Filed by men who think God wants them to own the desert. They are in the wrong box. Sort them." Lena's heart began to beat a slow, heavy drum. She untied a bundle of rolled canvases. For an hour, she sorted deeds and claims, and then she found it. It was not a small claim. It was a full surveyor's map, commissioned by the Arizona Central Railroad. It was beautiful, detailed, and utterly cold. It showed a line, thick and black, cutting directly through the high country. It ran straight through a canyon labeled Tonto Basin Uplands. Beneath it was a second document, a draft, a land grant cession. It proposed the relocation of the hostile Apache from the area, ceding the land to the railroad for development. And at the bottom, listed as a regional security consultant and signatory for the territorial government, was the name Colonel Harlan Briggs. This was it. This was the motive. Not just a rumor, but paper and ink. She had to tell Taza. She worked until the sun began to angle low, her mind racing. She finished her work, thanked the priest, and was walked back to the fort by her silent escort. But she knew she had to get out again. That night, she used the only weapon she had. She faked her own sickness. She pleaded with the guard, a boy from Illinois, claiming a woman's private complaint and begging for one of Martha Ellison's herbal remedies. The boy, red-faced and horrified, fetched the fort surgeon, who, after a brief, humiliating examination, declared her sound but hysterical. "She needs a tincture of laudanum and rest." "Colonel," the surgeon reported. "I will not take laudanum," Lena said, her voice weak but firm. "Mrs. Ellison, she has a tincture of willow bark." "Please, it is all that works for me." Briggs, annoyed by the female frailty, finally relented. "Oh, very well. Go, get your woman's potion, but be back within the hour." She was given a single soldier as an escort. She went not to Martha's, but to the livery stables, the prearranged signal spot. The soldier waited impatiently at the door. "I cannot go in. Ma'am?" "Of course not," Lena said. "Wait here." She stepped into the darkness, her heart in her throat. The stables smelled of hay and horses. "Taza," she whispered. He was not there. Her hope sank. She turned to leave, and a hand closed over her arm. He pulled her into an empty stall. "You should not have come," he hissed. "He let you out." "I had to." Her hands were shaking as she pulled the map, which she had folded and hidden in her skirts. "I found it. Look." She unfolded it in the faint moonlight streaming through the hayloft. He did not look at the signatures. He looked at the line on the map. His body went rigid. All warmth, all life, seemed to drain from him. "Taza, what is it?" "Tonto Basin," he said, his voice a low, guttural sound of such profound pain that she almost stepped back. "That is not its name. The white men call it that." "What is it?" "It is the Dzil Cha Sian," he said, "the heart of the world. It is the place our ancestors first touched the sky. It is where our dead are buried. It is not land. Lena, it is our soul." She finally understood. This was not a war for territory. It was a war for extermination. "He will take it," she said. "He has already signed the papers." "He will try," Taza said, his hand closing on the map, crushing it. "This is the proof, but it is not enough. We need more," Lena agreed. "We need allies." "I have no allies." "Yes, you do," she said, her voice fierce. "We are going to make them." The next day, she went to Sheriff Tom Reyes. She walked straight from the fort, her escort 10 paces behind, and into the sheriff's office. "Miss Hart," he said, rising, his face wary. "Get him out," she said to the soldier, pointing. "I have orders, ma'am." "And I have orders for you," she said, pulling $1 from her pocket. "Go to the saloon. Have a beer. I will be here when you return." The soldier, stunned, looked at the money, then at the sheriff, and fled. Lena closed the door. "Colonel Briggs is not just a murderer." "Sheriff," she said, "he is a thief, and I can prove it." She laid out what she had seen. The map, the railroad, the land grant. Reyes rubbed his face, his mustache drooping. "Senorita, this is the army. This is the government. My badge. It is just a piece of tin against that. But it is not just the Apache. Is it?" Lena pressed. "Who else is in his way? Who else has land he needs water rights? Elias Quintero? Perhaps." Reyes's head snapped up. "What do you know of Quintero?" "I know he has the best water rights in the valley. And I know his cattle have been disappearing. The same way the Apaches have." "You are a very smart woman," Reyes said, his eyes hard. "And you are playing a very stupid game." "Help me," she said. "We go to Quintero, together, you, me, and Father O'Leary. We form a wall that Briggs cannot just call savage." It took 2 days. 2 days of fast, secret talking. They met Quintero at his ranch, a sprawling, beautiful hacienda that was slowly dying. He was a proud man, with the face of a Spanish king, and he despised them both. "You come with the lawman who lets my cattle be stolen, and the priest who tells me to pray for my enemies," he spat. "I come," Lena said, "as the woman who saw Briggs' map. After he clears the Apache, he will clear the Mexican problem for the railroad. Your ranch is on that map. Senor Quintero, your water. He is not just taking their land, he is taking yours. Quintero, Reyes, and O'Leary, the law, the land, and the church. It was a fragile, terrified alliance. While Lena built her wall, Taza tore down Briggs's. He moved like the ghost they called him. He followed Maddox's trail. He found the Apache who had attacked the wagon. They were not at the fort. They were camped in an old, abandoned mine shaft, drinking whiskey and counting their blood money. Taza watched them for a full day. He saw the crates. They were army issue. Crates of new rifles, crates of ammunition, and, in a small wooden box, he found dozens of hawk feathers and jars of red ceremonial paint. They were preparing for another raid, a bigger one. Lena, meanwhile, was digging in the town. She told her escort she was visiting the sick. Instead, she went to the land office. She searched the deeds, stack after stack of dusty paper. She found them. 4 separate claims, filed in the last 6 months, for all the land surrounding the Tonto Basin. The parcels contained the only 3 artesian wells in the high desert, all of it purchased by one man, Clay Maddox. And the payments were all wired from a bank in St. Louis, the headquarters of the Arizona Central Railroad. She met Taza that night at the stables. The air was electric with what they had found. He is arming them again, Taza said, his voice flat and cold. He will send them to attack the railroad surveyors, dressed as my people. He will have his war. And he is buying the water, Lena said, her hands shaking. He is boxing you in. He will take the land and then sell the water rights back to the railroad for a fortune. She looked at him. He was not just a warrior. He was the only man who had shown her true courage. He was calm. He was strong. He respected this land he was fighting for. In a way, the men from her world, with their paper contracts and their greed, could never understand. She felt a pull toward him that was deeper than gratitude. It was terrifying. It felt like a betrayal of her own people, her own world. But that world had lied to her. This man, this savage, had not. Taza, too, was struggling. He had gone to Nantan, had shown him the map. The scarred warrior, the one who hated him, had been there. You are in the white woman's bed, the warrior had sneered. You speak with her tongue. You have brought this curse on us. I am speaking the truth, Taza had said. Truth, the warrior said. Or are you leading the soldiers for her, to clear our land so she can have it? He was trapped. His own people saw him as a white man's tool. The white men saw him as a savage. He was alone, except for this woman, and trusting her could be the end of them all. The choice was taken from them. Briggs felt the shift in the town. He felt the quiet meetings. He saw Lena walking with a purpose. No longer a rabbit. He knew he was running out of time. He had to force the game. He did not send Maddox. He sent his own soldiers. They rode out, not east to the canyons, but west to the flats where a small, peaceful band of Apache women and children were gathering piñon nuts. It was not a battle. It was a roundup. Lena was in her room at the fort when they returned. She heard the crying. She ran out onto the parade ground. They had built a temporary stockade, a cage, in the center of the fort. Inside, huddled in the dirt, were 24 women, children, and old men. She saw Sansi, the old woman who had given her shelter, her face a mask of stone. She saw the children Taza had been teaching. "What is this?" Lena screamed at the guard. "Colonel's orders." "Miss," the guard said, avoiding her eyes. "Hostile dependents, moved for their own safety, to ensure the good behavior of the warriors." It was San Carlos. It was a prison camp. It was a death sentence. "Hostages," Lena whispered, her body rigid with a cold, pure rage. "He has taken them as hostages." She looked at the women, their faces filled with terror and despair. She looked at Briggs, watching from his office window, his arms crossed, his face triumphant. She knew what she had to do. She turned, her face calm, and walked back to her room. She had to get to Taza. This was no longer about truth. This was no longer about land. This was about survival. That night, she slipped out. The guards were lax. They were too busy watching the crying children in the stockade. She ran to the stables. He was already there, but he was not the Taza she knew. The calm was gone. His eyes were fire. He was holding a rifle. "I will kill them all," he said, his voice a low growl. "I will burn this fort to the ground." "No," she said, grabbing his arm. "That is what he wants. Do not you see it is a trap? He has soldiers on the rooftops. He wants you to attack the stockade. He wants to slaughter you and call it resisting arrest." Taza froze, the truth of her words hitting him. "He has my people. He has Sansi." "I know. And I know where his papers are. The real ones. The payroll for Maddox, the letters from the railroad. They are in his office." They looked at each other, the same desperate, terrible understanding passing between them. "We cannot just free the hostages," Lena said. "We cannot just steal the papers. We have to do both at the same time." "He will have guards on both," Taza said. "Then we need a third target," Lena said, her mind racing, her father's strategic mind suddenly her own. "A bigger one, something he values more." Taza looked past her, toward the long, low building at the back of the fort, the building with the thickest walls and the heaviest locks. "The armory," he said. "Yes," Lena said, her heart hammering. "You create a diversion, a real one. You draw every soldier to the armory fire. while they are fighting the flames. I get the papers. And my people, he asked, his voice raw.
They get themselves out,
Lena said. Sansei is in there. She's a warrior, too. You get them a path. I get the proof. We meet at the south wall. Taza looked at her, his eyes searching her face in the darkness. You are asking me to set a fire inside his walls, to start a war. He started this war when he dressed his men in your paint, Lena said. We are going to finish it. Tonight. The plan was desperate, and it began with a lie. Lena, her face pale and set, walked from the stables where Taza had been hidden. She carried her medical valise. She went straight to her guard. It is the children, she said, her voice trembling with a performance of fear. The Apache children in the stockade. I hear them. They have the fever. I must take them medicine. The guard, a young man named Cobb, shook his head. Colonel's orders. Miss no one in or out. They are children, she snapped, her voice rising. Are you going to let them die? That is not a risk. That is mercy. Go and ask the colonel. Ask him if he wants the deaths of children on his hands before the priest has had his breakfast. The guard, terrified of her, of the prisoners, and of the colonel, was trapped. He looked at the stockade. A child was, indeed, crying. Wait here, he growled. He marched to the colonel's office. The moment he was gone, Taza was there. He had not been in the stables. He had been on the roof, a shadow against the stars. He dropped to the ground in perfect silence. The office, he whispered. Now. They did not run. They walked. Two shadows, keeping to the deepest pools of blackness cast by the adobe buildings. The diversion at the stockade was a small one, but it was all they had. The guard was arguing with the night duty officer. All eyes were turned away from the center of the fort. Taza reached the colonel's office. The door was locked. He did not hesitate. He slid a long, thin piece of steel from his boot, and in 3 seconds, the lock clicked open. They slipped inside. The room was dark, smelling of whiskey and sealing wax. The desk, Lena whispered. Taza was already there. He did not search. He seemed to know. He pulled out the bottom drawer, reached deep inside, and his hand hit a false bottom. He pulled it free. Inside was a heavy leather ledger and a stack of letters tied with ribbon. Lena struck a sulfur match. Her hand was shaking. The small flame a tiny sun in the darkness. She held it over the ledger. It was a payroll. Clay Maddox, $500. J. Smith, $100. T. Green, $100. The names of the murderers. And this, Taza said, holding the letters. It was from the railroad. Upon the successful removal of the Tonto Basin hostiles, a bonus of $10,000. We have it, Lena whispered, a wild, fierce joy rising in her. We have it all, and we have been discovered, Taza said, his voice cold. The match flame illuminated a pair of boots in the doorway. Colonel Briggs stood there, a lamp in one hand and a revolver in the other. He had not gone to bed. I must confess, Miss Hart, Briggs said, his voice conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. I am disappointed. I thought you were a rabbit. It seems you are a snake. Taza moved, placing himself between Lena and the gun. He did not have his rifle, only his knife. And the ghost. Briggs smiled. Caught at last. Your little fire at the hayloft was a clever distraction, but you stayed too long. It is over, Colonel, Lena said, her voice shaking but loud. She held the ledger up. We have the proof. Proof, Briggs laughed. My dear, you have an accounting book, and you are a woman in hysterics who has been defiled by a savage. And he, Briggs gestured to Taza, is a dead man. No one will miss either of you. Taza threw the desk. It was a move of pure, animal strength. The heavy oak table flipped, crashing into Briggs. The lamp flew, smashing against the wall, and the room was plunged into darkness, lit only by the sudden orange flare of the revolver. Bang! The sound was deafening. Run! Taza yelled, grabbing Lena's arm. He shoved her through the door as another shot tore through the wood where she had been standing. The alarm bell began to ring. A frantic, iron clang. "Halt!" a sentry shouted. They ran for the stables. It was their only hope. Taza had 2 horses, saddled and waiting, just inside the back wall. They burst into the stable, the air thick with the smell of hay and panicked horses. Taza untied the reins in one motion. "Get on!" he yelled. Soldiers were pouring onto the parade ground. Confused, half-dressed, Taza vaulted onto his horse. Lena, her skirts tangling, got her foot in the stirrup. "Sentry at the stables." It was Maddox's voice. Taza grabbed Lena, pulling her up onto the horse. He spurred the animal, and they exploded from the stable doors. 2 more soldiers firing at them from the porch. They were on the open parade ground. The gate was closed. "The south wall!" Taza bellowed. "It is weaker." They galloped toward the low, adobe wall at the back of the fort. Soldiers were on the ramparts now, their rifles aimed. A volley of shots erupted. Lena cried out, a sharp, sudden gasp. "What is it?" Taza yelled. I am hit," she gasped, her hands clutching her side. "Oh, God, Taza, it hurts." He looked down. In the moonlight, he could see the dark stain spreading across the side of her dress, just below her ribs. He said nothing, his face a mask of stone. He spurred the horse, hitting the south wall at a dead run. The horse, trained for this, jumped. It scrambled, its hooves finding purchase. And then they were over, dropping 10 feet to the desert sand outside. They landed hard, Lena crying out in pain. Taza did not slow. He rode low over the horse's neck, heading not for the town, but for the high, jagged rocks of the canyons. And then the sky tore open. It was not a drizzle. It was a monsoon, a wall of cold, driving rain that hit them like a physical blow. The desert, dry for 8 months, became an instant, swirling river of mud. Lightning cracked, illuminating the world in stark, blue-white flashes. Behind them, they heard shouts. Maddox and his men, they were in pursuit. "They are gaining," Lena cried, her voice thin with pain and fear. "The mud is killing the horses," Taza said, his voice tight. The animals were sinking to their fetlocks, panicked and slipping. "We have to leave them." He slid from the horse, pulling her down with him. She screamed as she landed, the pain in her side exploding. "We run," he said, pulling her up. "The water in the canyons will hide our tracks." He half dragged, half carried her. They ran, stumbling over rocks, falling in the slick, red mud. The rain was so thick she could not breathe. She was leaving a trail of blood, but the deluge was washing it away as fast as it fell. "I cannot," she sobbed, her legs giving out. "Taza, I am so cold. I cannot." She was right. The blood loss, the cold, the rain. She was going into shock. He looked around, desperate, a flash of lightning showing him the sheer rock walls. And then he saw it. A shadow, darker than the other shadows, a crack in the rock, hidden behind a curtain of desert brush. He pulled her toward it, shoving the brush aside. It was a cave. He pushed her inside, into the dry, sudden blackness. It was not cold. It was warm. A deep, sulphurous warmth, breathing from the rock. Taza pulled his flint and steel from his pouch. He struck a spark. The small, dry tinder he carried caught, and a tiny flame illuminated their refuge. It was a deep, high-ceilinged cavern, and in the back, steam was rising from a dark pool of water.
"A hot spring,"
Taza whispered. "The spirits are watching." He laid her down on a flat, dry rock. She was shaking violently, her teeth chattering so hard it sounded like a rattle.
"So cold,"
she whispered, her eyes wide with fever.
"It is the wound,"
he said. He took his knife.
"No,"
she whimpered, flinching. "Please, only the dress," he said, his voice quiet. "I must see." He slit the wet, heavy fabric. The wound was high on her left side, on her hip, just grazing the ribs. It was a deep, ugly tear, bleeding sluggishly. "I must clean this," he said, his voice flat with a clinical need. "The water from the spring is clean. It will burn, but if I do not, the fever will kill you." He dipped a clean cloth from his pack into the hot, steaming water. He wrung it out. He turned to her. He reached for her side. Lena flinched away, scrambling backward on the rock. "No!" It was not a shout. It was a raw cry of shame, of pain. She was a woman from Boston. This was her body, her private self. And this man, this savage, as her world would call him, he was seeing her. He was about to touch her. She pulled the torn remnants of her dress against her, her face burning with a humiliation that was stronger than her fear of death. "Don't touch there," she whispered, her voice breaking, tears streaming down her face. It was not a command. It was a plea. She was not afraid of him. She was afraid of this total, devastating vulnerability. Taza froze. His hand stopped, inches from her skin. He knelt beside her. He looked, not at her wound, not at her body, but directly into her eyes. He held her gaze, and the thunder outside seemed to dim. He spoke, and his voice was low and heavy, and it vibrantly filled the small cave. "I will not touch where I am not allowed." He did not move. He waited. He let her see him. "But this wound," he said, his voice softening, "is my responsibility now. Your heart, your life." He leaned closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "If you let me," "is mine to protect." He looked at the wound, then back at her. "It's mine now." The words hung in the warm, steamy air. It was not a claim of ownership. It was a vow, a transfer of burden. Lena searched his face. She saw no lust. She saw no pity. She saw a fierce, terrifying, and absolute dedication. And in that moment, she knew she had never been safer in her entire life. She let out a long, trembling breath. She gave a single, tiny nod. She did not flinch when he touched her. She gasped as the hot water hit the raw flesh, her nails digging into the stone, but she did not pull away. He worked with a surprising gentleness, his large hands steady and sure, cleaning the grit and blood. "The bullet passed through," he said. "It is clean." He bandaged her tightly with more cloth, but she was still shaking. The fever was taking hold. He had one dry blanket in his pack. He wrapped it around her, but her tremors did not stop. "You need warmth," he said, "or the cold will kill you." He sat on the rock behind her, pulled her back against his chest, and wrapped the blanket around both of them. Lena stiffened, her whole body rigid. "Be still," he said, his voice a low command. "This is not for passion. This is for life. My heat is all we have." Slowly, she let herself relax. His body was a furnace against her back. The shaking began to subside. They sat in silence, wrapped together, listening to the storm rage outside. "Taza," she whispered, her voice thready. "I am here. I am afraid. Maddox will not find us in this storm." "No," she said, her voice small. "I am afraid of tomorrow. If we live, what are we, a white teacher and an Apache warrior? There is no place for us." He was silent for a long time. She could feel the slow, steady beat of his heart against her spine. "I, too, am afraid," he said, his voice a low vibration. "I am afraid my people will see you and only see the color of your skin. I am afraid your people will see me and only see a savage. And I am afraid," his voice grew rough, "that you will one day look at me and see only that." She turned in his arms, a move that cost her a sharp intake of breath as her side flared in pain. She faced him, her hands coming to rest on his shoulders. "I have seen the savage," she whispered, her eyes searching his in the dim firelight. "He wears a blue uniform. He signs papers in an office. He is not you." The space between them crackled. He looked at her mouth, at her eyes. He leaned in, slowly, giving her time to pull away. She did not pull away. She met him. The kiss was not gentle. It was desperate, and it was deep. It was a kiss of survival, of two worlds colliding, of finding an anchor in a world that was trying to drown them. It tasted of rain and smoke and a shared terror. When they pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. He reached inside his worn shirt and pulled a leather thong from around his neck. On it was a single, smooth piece of blue turquoise. He untied it. He tied it around her neck. "My mother's," he said, his voice thick. "It is for protection." Her hand went to the small silver cross at her own throat. "Her father's." She unclasped the delicate chain and pressed it into his hand.
"My father's,"
she whispered.
"It is for, justice."
He closed his hand around it, the metal already warming to his skin. "If we live through this storm, Lena Hart," he said, his voice raw with an emotion she had never heard. "There is no more hiding. We stand together, or we fall together. There is no other path." The pain, the warmth, and the sheer shock of the night finally pulled her under. She fell into a deep, feverish sleep, her head resting on his shoulder. Taza did not sleep. He held her, his body a shield against the cold, listening to the rain slow to a steady drip. Hours passed. The storm died. The silence of the high desert returned, broken only by the sound of water dripping from the rocks. Then he heard it, a sound that did not belong. A faint scrape, a pebble, dislodged, skittering down the rock face far above the cave's hidden entrance. His body went rigid. He heard it again, the heavy, exhausted step of a man, or several men, Maddox. They had not given up. They had tracked them, even through the storm. Slowly, his movements infinitely gentle. Taza laid Lena's head on his saddlebag. He covered her with the blanket. He picked up his rifle. He checked the load. He moved, silent as a ghost, to the mouth of the cave, and blended into the darkness, a predator waiting. He was at the cave mouth before the sound finished echoing, his rifle a part of him. The rain had stopped, and the air was washed clean, sharp with the smell of wet creosote and sulfur. "He is coming from above," Taza whispered, more to himself than to the sleeping woman behind him. He pressed his body flat against the rock, a lizard waiting. The scraping was closer now, not the stealth of an Apache, but the clumsy, heavy boot of a white man. "Taza, son of the ghost!" The voice was not Maddox. It was a guttural whisper, in Apache. Taza froze. He moved from the shadows, his rifle still leveled. "Who comes?" "Cachise," the voice answered. "And we bring the white man's law." A figure moved in the pre-dawn light. It was the scarred warrior, the one who had spat at Lena's feet in the village. And behind him, his face grim, was Sheriff Tom Reyes. Beside him, looking furious and holding a shotgun, was Elias Quintero. 4 men, their faces a mask of hard-won ground, stood with them. 2 were Apache, 2 were Quintero's vaqueros. "How did you find this place?" Taza asked, his suspicion a cold wall. "We followed the buzzards," Reyes said, his voice heavy. "The ones you and Maddox made, but that is not why we are here." He looked past Taza into the cave and saw the small shape under the blanket. "Is she lives," Taza said. "Wounded. Thank God," Reyes breathed. Then his face hardened. "Because Colonel Briggs just told the whole town she is dead, murdered by you." Taza went still. "What?" "He has done it," Elias Quintero spat, checking the load on his shotgun. "He used your attack on the fort. He declared Miss Hart dead, a martyr. He has issued a proclamation the Tonto Basin Apache are at war. He has taken every soldier from the fort. He has deputized Maddox's men. They are riding, Taza, right now. They are riding to the hidden valley. He is not making war," the scarred warrior, Cachise, said, his voice a low growl of hate. "He is riding to finish what San Carlos started. He is riding to exterminate us." Taza looked back at the cave, at the woman who was Briggs's excuse. "He used her death, while she still lives." "Nantan is in that valley," Cachise said, his hand on his knife. "We must ride. We must warn them." "We will never beat them," Taza said, his mind racing, the warrior replacing the lover. "The main force is too fast. They will be there by noon." "Maddox and his band of butchers cut south," Reyes said. "Briggs sent them to sweep these canyons. He is trying to cut you off, to be sure no one escapes. He wants you as much as he wants the land." Taza looked up at the canyon walls. They were in a narrow, high-walled trap. Then that is where we stop him. Stop who? Reyes said. Briggs is not here. Maddox is, Taza said. He is the head of the snake, and he is coming this way. He pointed down the canyon. A mile from here, the walls narrow. It is called the Devil's Jaw. Maddox's men will ride in, expecting to find one man and one wounded woman. They will not be looking up. Kachisi stared at Taza, his long-held hate replaced by a sudden, sharp understanding. A predator's grin. A trap. You and the other warriors, Taza commanded. Take the ridges. Quintero, you and your men block the far end. Sheriff, you will be with me. And what of me? The voice was thin, but it was iron. Lena stood at the mouth of the cave. She was wrapped in the single blanket, her face pale as milk, her hair plastered to her head. But she was standing, and in her hands, wrapped in oilcloth. She held the ledger. You are wounded, Taza said, moving to her. You cannot ride. I can, she said, her teeth chattering. I'm cold, but I can ride, and this, she clutched the bundle. Does not leave my sight. I am the witness. This is the proof. I will guard it. Reyes looked at the small, fierce woman and nodded. She is right. She is the only reason any soldier might listen. He pulled a heavy wool poncho from his saddlebag. Take this. Señorita, it is a long day. They set the trap with the silent, brutal efficiency of men who knew the land. The four Apache, led by Taza, climbed the sheer rock walls, vanishing into the crevices, their rifles ready. Quintero and his vaqueros built a hasty but solid barricade of fallen rock at the canyon's narrow exit. Lena was placed behind that barricade, her back against solid stone. Reyes handed her a loaded pistol. You are the last line. Miss Hart, do not use this, he said, tapping the ledger. Until you must, she sat, her side a blazing fire, the pistol heavy in her lap. And she waited. The canyon was silent. For an hour. Nothing moved but the sun. Then she heard them. The jingle of harness. A man's laugh. Rough and cruel. Maddox and his men rode into the Devil's Jaw. There were 15 of them. They rode with the lazy arrogance of men who believed they were the only wolves in the valley. Spread out, Maddox bellowed. Find the woman's tracks. Briggs wants that half-breed's head, and I mean to collect. They passed the spot where Taza and the Apache were hidden. They rode deeper, toward the barricade. A single high-pitched cry of a hawk echoed from the ridge. The world exploded. The first volley came from above. 3 of Maddox's men were thrown from their saddles before they even heard the shots. Horses screamed and reared. Ambush, a man yelled. Just as Quintero and Reyes opened fire from the barricade. It was a perfect crossfire. A slaughter. Maddox's men were trapped, firing wildly at rocks that fired back. In 3 minutes, it was over. Maddox's horse was shot, and it fell, pinning his leg. He roared in rage, pulling himself free. He scrambled behind a large boulder, his pistols in his hands. A shadow dropped from the ledge above him. It was Taza. He landed on the sand, 10 feet away, his knife in one hand, his rifle in the other. Maddox fired his pistol. Taza did not move, and the bullet whined off the rock, feet from his head. It is just you and me now. Ghost, Maddox snarled, his face covered in the blood of his horse. It is, Taza said. They met on the flat ledge. It was not a gunfight. It was a brawl. Maddox was a brawler, all swinging fists and animal rage. Taza was a phantom, all speed and sharp, precise strikes. She is good, is she not? Maddox panted, lunging with his knife. That little schoolteacher bet she learned a few new tricks in your camp. Taza blocked the strike, his forearm stinging. He drove a fist into Maddox's gut. She will not want you, Maddox choked, spitting blood. When this is over, she will go back to her own. A white woman like that. She will never, ever choose a red skin like you. He lunged again, his knife flashing. The taunt hit Taza harder than any bullet. The rage, the cold fury he had held in check, exploded. He dropped his rifle and met the charge. He broke Maddox's wrist, the bone snapping with a wet crunch. He spun the man around, his arm around his throat, his own knife pressing against Maddox's artery. He looked for 1 second at the man's terrified, bulging eyes. He saw all of it. The burning wagons, the dead soldiers, Lena's wound, the children in the stockade. He was going to kill him. Taza, no, Lena's voice. She was at the barricade, standing, her hand outstretched. Taza froze. He looked at her. He felt the small silver cross, cold against his skin. Under his shirt, he let out a long, shuddering breath. He pulled his knife away from Maddox's throat. "No," Taza said, his voice a low growl. "You will not die. You will live." He slammed his fist into Maddox's temple, and the man went limp. "You will live to tell them his name." He bound the unconscious man's hands. It was over. Quintero and Reyes were already checking the dead, and then they heard it. It was not a rifle shot. It was not a shout. It was a sound that did not belong in the canyon, a clear, sharp, military bugle call. From the mouth of the canyon, where Maddox had just entered, a new column of riders appeared. They were not mercenaries. They were soldiers, in clean blue uniforms, riding 2 by 2, and at their head, on a magnificent black stallion, was Colonel Harlan Briggs. He took in the scene in one sweeping glance: the dead mercenaries, the Apache on the ridge, the armed Mexican, the town sheriff, and the 2 fugitives, Taza and Lena, standing over the body of his right-hand man. Briggs's face was a mask of cold, righteous fury. He drew his sword. "Ambush!" he roared, for his soldiers to hear. "The savages have ambushed my rescue party. They have killed Mr. Maddox and his men. They are attacking the sheriff Firefire. It will save the woman." The disciplined line of soldiers raised their rifles. The allies, Taza and Reyes and Quintero, were caught in the open. "No!" Lena screamed. "Taza, the ledger!" She grabbed the reins of Quintero's horse. "Lena, get down!" Taza yelled, running toward her. She ignored him. She pulled herself into the saddle, a cry of pure, unadulterated agony tearing from her throat as her wound ripped open. She did not care. She kicked the horse, hard, and galloped straight into the open ground between the soldiers and the barricade. "Stop!" she screamed, her voice raw. "Stop! In the name of God!" The soldiers hesitated. A white woman, her dress stained with blood, was riding directly at them. "Hold your fire. Men," Briggs commanded. "She is their hostage. They are using her as a shield." "I am not a hostage," Lena cried, pulling the horse to a stop. She ripped the oilcloth from the ledger and held the book high, like a shield. "I am a witness, and this man," she pointed directly at Briggs, "is a murderer." The soldiers stared, their rifles wavering. "This is his payroll," she shouted, her voice echoing in the canyon. "He hired these men." She pointed at the dead mercenaries. "He paid them to kill your fellow soldiers. He paid them to attack the medicine wagon. He is the savage." "She is hysterical," Briggs roared. "Delirious sees the Apache." "She speaks the truth," Sheriff Reyes shouted, walking into the open, his tin badge held high. "As the appointed law in this territory, I am placing Colonel Harlan Briggs under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. And as a man of God," a new voice said, "I command you to listen." Father O'Leary, who had ridden with Reyes, walked out, his black robe stark against the red rock, his own small cross held high. "Soldiers, do not fire on the innocent. You are being used. Look at your commander's face. Look at the truth." The soldiers were not looking at the Apache. They were not looking at the sheriff. They were looking at Colonel Briggs, and they were seeing, for the first time, the greed and the lies, their loyalty, in one single terrible moment, broke. Briggs saw it. He saw his career, his money, his entire world, ending. He was trapped. He did not hesitate. He spurred his stallion, not at Taza, not at the soldiers, but at Lena. He was on her before she could react. He grabbed her by the arm, his strength inhuman, and pulled her from her horse, dragging her in front of him. He pressed the barrel of his revolver to her temple. "Back!" he screamed. His civilized mask shattered, his face a purple mask of pure rage. "Every one of you back, or I will send her to hell right now." He yanked the horse's head, turning it toward a narrow, winding mule track that led up the side of the cliff. "It is over," Lena, Taza roared. He ran for his own horse. A single soldier, still loyal or just terrified, raised his rifle. "Halt! Apache!" He fired. The bullet struck Taza high in the left shoulder, spinning him around. He grunted, a deep, animal sound, and stumbled, but he did not fall. He ignored the fire in his arm, got his foot in the stirrup, and swung onto his horse. Blood already staining his shirt. Briggs was halfway up the path, his horse scrambling, Lena struggling in his grip. Taza followed. He reached the top of the precipice just as Briggs dismounted, pulling Lena with him. They were on a flat, narrow ledge, a sheer, 1,000-foot drop on one side. Taza dismounted, his own rifle in his hand, his left arm useless. "Let her go, Briggs! It is over! Savage!" Briggs screamed, his eyes wild. He was holding Lena tight. "We all die together." He shoved Lena hard toward Taza and, in the same motion, raised his revolver to fire. Taza dropped his own rifle and lunged, not at Briggs, but at Lena, trying to pull her away from the edge. Briggs fired. Lena twisted, knocking his arm. The three of them collided, a desperate, tangled mass of limbs. They were on the very edge of the precipice. A second shot rang out, the gun discharging in the chaos of the struggle. The sound flat and final. All three of them teetered, suspended for one long, terrible, silent second, balanced between the blue sky and the red rocks below. It was not a single, clean sound. It was a crunch of bone and a tearing of rock. Colonel Briggs, his eyes wide with a final, ignoble surprise, vanished. He did not fall clear. He dropped, striking a narrow outcrop 10 feet below, his leg twisting at an unnatural angle. A single, sharp scream of agony, quickly bitten off, echoed up the canyon wall. Lena was falling with him, the momentum of his shove pulling her over the edge. Her fingers scrabbled at the rock, finding nothing. "No!" Taza's hand shot out. He caught her wrist. He was a one-armed anchor. His other arm, the one with the bullet in the shoulder, was useless, hanging, painting the rock with his blood. He had his feet braced, his moccasins finding purchase in a crack. He held her, his body rigid with a pain that was beyond comprehension. He was holding her with one hand and with the other. He was holding himself to the cliff face. Lena dangled, her own wounded side screaming. The world a spinning, nauseating blur of red rock and blue sky. "Hold on," he grunted, the words forced from his chest. "Lena, hold on." "Taza, your arm?" she whispered, seeing the blood. "Hold on." Hands appeared. Strong hands. Kachisi, the scarred warrior, was the first one to the ledge, moving like a mountain goat. Behind him, two of the younger soldiers, their faces pale with shock, their rifles slung. They had seen, they had understood. "He lives." Kachisi spat, looking over the edge at the groaning, writhing form of Briggs. "The woman first," one of the soldiers said, his voice shaking. "My God, Lieutenant, help me." They formed a chain. The soldier grabbed Taza's good arm. Another grabbed Lena's, and Kachise anchored them all. With a great unified heave, they pulled. Lena, then Taza, were dragged, sliding, back onto the solid, safe rock of the ledge. Lena collapsed, gasping, her hand clutching the ledger to her chest. Taza did not collapse. He sank in a controlled motion, to his knees, his head bowed, his body trembling with the shock of his wounds, his good hand pressed against the bleeding hole in his shoulder. The standoff was over. Down in the canyon. The world had changed. The remaining soldiers, their rifles lowered, looked confused, angry, and ashamed. They were not looking at the Apache on the ridges as enemies. They were looking at each other, as men who had been lied to. They brought Briggs up. It was a slow, painful process. He was strapped to a makeshift litter, his face a waxy gray color, beaded with sweat. His leg was shattered. They laid him on the ground. He was surrounded. Sheriff Reyes stood at his head. Elias Quintero stood at his feet. Father O'Leary knelt beside him, offering a canteen. Briggs, even in his agony, was defiant. He pushed the canteen away. "You are all fools," he hissed, his voice thin and reedy. You think this changes anything, reinforcements? They will be here by morning. You will all hang, the Apache, the Mexican, and the traitors. He glared at his own men. All of you. Lena pushed Taza's hand away as he tried to tend to her wound. No, she said. Me first. She stood, her body a single column of pain. She walked to Briggs. She knelt in the dust beside him, so he could see her face. You have no reinforcements. Colonel, she said. Her voice quiet, but carrying in the sudden, absolute silence of the canyon. She laid the ledger on his chest. You have only this, your payroll, for the men you hired to kill your own soldiers. She pulled the folded map from her pocket, the one he had signed. You have only this, your payment from the railroad, for the land you were stealing. She looked up at Sheriff Reyes. And what did he say? Reyes nodded. Clay Maddox was awake. He was tied to a wagon wheel, his face a mask of terror. He is talking. Colonel, he is talking to save his own skin. Lena looked back at Briggs. He told us everything. Harlan, the money, the plan to dress as Apache, the scalping. He told us about the first ambush, the one you sent me on as bait. She leaned closer. You have no more soldiers. You have no more lies. You have nothing. Briggs looked at the ledger, at the map, at the ring of cold, hard faces around him. He saw no fear. He saw only justice. He closed his eyes. Kill me, then, he whispered. Get it over with. Cachis, the scarred warrior, stepped forward. His knife was in his hand. It would be my pleasure, he growled. For my brother, for the children in your cage. Other Apache warriors moved in, their faces hard. Taza was on his feet, his own knife in his good hand. He had every right. He saw the prison at San Carlos. He saw his sister's child, dying. He saw the bullet in his own shoulder, and the wound in Lena's side. He stepped forward, his face a mask of cold fury. Taza, no! Lena's hand found his good hand, the one not holding the knife. She did not pull. She just held it. He stopped, his gaze fixed on the pathetic, broken man on the ground. If you kill him now, Lena whispered. Her voice meant only for him. You make him a martyr. You make this a battle. His lie becomes the story. They will say the savage Apache murdered a decorated colonel, and nothing will change. Taza looked at her. He saw the wisdom in her eyes, a wisdom that was harder than his rage. Justice, Taza, she whispered, her fingers tightening on his. She touched the small silver cross at his throat. Not vengeance. Taza looked at his knife. He looked at Briggs. He let out a long, slow breath, releasing the ghosts. He sheathed the knife. He turned to the ranking soldier, a young lieutenant whose face was pale. Sheriff Reyes has arrested this man, Taza said, his voice clear and hard. He is your prisoner, and he is ours. The decision hung in the air. This was the moment. The lieutenant looked at Taza. He looked at Lena. He looked at his men. Then he stepped forward and pulled the colonel's insignia from Briggs's bloody uniform. He is a prisoner of the United States Army, the lieutenant said. He will be tried for treason. The arrival of the investigating officer 2 days later was almost a formality. He was a major, a pragmatic man from Prescott with cold eyes and a desire to make this entire mess disappear. He sat in the sheriff's office, not the fort. He listened for 6 hours. He heard Sheriff Reyes. He heard Elias Quintero. He heard Father O'Leary. He heard Clay Maddox, who sang like a canary, offering up dates, names, and dollar amounts in a desperate, sniveling plea for his life. He heard the soldiers who had been on the ledge, the ones who had seen their colonel use a white woman as a shield. And he heard Lena Hart. She laid the ledger on his desk. She showed him the map. She told him about her father. When it was all done, the major made his decision. Briggs would be transported to a military prison back east to face a court-martial and, as the major put it, fade from the pages of history. The Army's reputation, he explained, was paramount. Maddox, for his cooperation, would be spared hanging, but would serve his life in a territorial prison. The town of Sagebrush Crossing had to face its own reckoning. The hearings were public. The townspeople sat in the hot, crowded church and listened. They heard how they had been manipulated. They heard the lies they had been so eager to believe. Some, their faces tight with hate, still looked at Taza and the other Apache as the enemy, but many looked ashamed. Martha Ellison sat in the front row. She looked at Lena, and her eyes were filled with a fierce, terrible pride. A new treaty was drawn, not in the fort, but in the sheriff's office. Nantan, Taza, Elias Quintero, and the new army major, the railroad line would be moved. It would bypass the Tonto Basin entirely, running south through Quintero's land. He agreed. In exchange for fair payment and a permanent army contract to supply beef, the Sacred Valley, the heart of the world, was safe. The Apache, in return, would not be a problem for the railroad. It was not peace, it was a truce, built on paper and exhaustion. But it was a start. On the last day, Taza and Lena were called to sign their testimony. The fighting was over, the shooting was done, and now the hardest part began. They stood before the major, side by side. Taza's arm was in a sling. Lena's side was tightly bound. She would walk with a limp for a month. They were not just two witnesses. Everyone in the room saw it. The way he stood, his body a shield between her and the world. The way her eyes found his, a silent conversation. The whispers had not stopped. They had only changed. An Indian's woman. She will never go back east now. Look at them. It is unnatural. But some whispers were different. They saved us. He saved her. She saved him. They are the only ones who told the truth. The war in the canyon was over. The war in the town, in their lives, had just begun. The smoke from the Battle of the Canyon did not clear quickly. It was replaced by the acrid, slower-burning smoke of politics. Colonel Harlan Briggs was gone. He was not afforded the dignity of a horse. He was loaded into a simple supply wagon, his legs splinted and bound, his face a mask of gray, opiate-fueled indifference. He was a non-person, a ghost being sent back east to a military prison, a man to be buried in a file, his name a footnote of treason. Clay Maddox was also gone. He was marched in chains to the territorial prison in Yuma, his sniveling confessions having saved him from the gallows. He would spend the rest of his life staring at a different kind of rock wall, paying for his greed with his sweat. The railroad, in a flurry of telegrams and frantic backroom deals, rerouted. The Arizona Central Railroad issued a statement condemning the rogue actions of its consultant, Briggs, and announced a new, more southerly route. It would cut through Elias Quintero's land, but the check he received for the right-of-way and the new contract to supply the army with beef eased his pain considerably. The truce was signed in the sheriff's office. It was a new room. The power no longer lived at the fort. It sat around Tom Reyes's battered oak desk. Nantan was there, his face as ancient and unyielding as the mountains. Taza sat beside him, his left arm in a sling, his presence a silent declaration. Sheriff Reyes sat behind his desk. Father O'Leary and Elias Quintero sat on a bench, witnesses for the town. The new army major, a man named Croft, represented the government, his face a mask of weary pragmatism. The terms were simple. The Tonto Basin, the heart of the world, was declared permanent Apache territory by territorial accord. Nantan, and his designated representative, Taza, would have a seat on any council regarding land or water use in the valley. The fort would be downsized. Its mission changed from pacification to policing, with an emphasis on guarding the new railroad line. It was not peace. It was a line drawn in the sand, one that both sides had agreed, for now, not to cross. Sagebrush Crossing began to breathe again, a different kind of air. The tension of war was gone, replaced by the low, humming tension of an uneasy coexistence. The talk in the saloon, once filled with boasts of Indian fighting, turned to the more practical matters of cattle prices and railroad speculation. Lena reopened her school. She did not reopen it at the fort. She moved it back to the small church basement. On the first day, 12 children showed up. The 6 white children, the 4 Mexican children, and, walking in together, their heads high, 2 Apache children from the flats, sent by Nantan. A cold silence fell on the room. A rancher's son, a boy named Jed, looked at the Apache children as if they were coyotes. "They cannot come in here," he said. Lena Hart, who had been shot, held hostage, and had faced down a colonel, looked at the boy. Her face was pale, and the wound in her side still made her limp, but her eyes were made of a new kind of steel. "Good morning, Nalin," she said to the small Apache girl. "Good morning, Kavi. There are seats in the front. We are starting with arithmetic." She turned and wrote on the slate. The silence behind her was absolute. Then she heard the scrape of a bench. The lesson began. The fighting was over. The living was the new, harder battle. Taza found her that evening. She was not at the boarding house. She was at the river, just south of town, watching the water turn purple in the twilight. He came up beside her, his moccasins making no sound. He, too, had changed. He was no longer just the ghost. He was a leader, a negotiator. He wore the silver cross, openly, on the outside of his shirt. She wore the blue turquoise, and the women in town had not stopped whispering about it. They stood, side by side, for a long time. The space between them was no longer a question of survival. It was a question of life. "They are safe," he said, his voice low. "Sansei and the others, they are back in the valley." "I am glad," she said. "Nantan thanks you. My people, they know your name." "And your people," she said. "They still hate yours. The whispers have not stopped. They just changed their tune." He nodded, his face grim. "They will not stop, not in my lifetime." The question hung in the air between them, heavy and cold as the river water. What now? "You cannot stay at the boarding house," he said. It was a flat statement. "No," she said. Martha is kind. She is my friend, but I saw her face today when I walked in with Nalin and Kavi. She thinks I have gone too far. She is afraid for me, and she is afraid of what the town will think of her." "You will come to the valley," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement. "Nalin's mother has made you a new tunic. There is a wiki up for you. You will be safe." She turned to him, her heart aching. "I cannot. Taza, I am not Apache. I am not Sunsi. I do not know how to be your woman in your world. I do not know how to scrape hides and grind corn. I am a teacher. I am from Boston." She looked down. "If I go to your valley, I am just another white woman, a prisoner of a different kind. I will be the only one. I will be alone." His face hardened. He had not expected this. "And you will stay here in this town with the whispers, with the hate." "It is my town, too, now," she said, a tear tracing a line in the dust on her cheek. "But I cannot stay here either, not with you." "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice suddenly sharp. "If you live in this town," she said, her voice raw. "What are you? You are the pet Indian again. You are the savage they tolerate because you are Lena Hart's man. You will be alone. Taza, a ghost in a town that hates you. I will not do that to you. I will not be your cage." The pain in his face was sharp. She had put her finger on the very fears he had not dared to speak. He had no world. She had no world. They were trapped, caught between the two halves of the canyon. "So what?" he said, his voice flat. I do not know," she whispered. "I truly do not know." That night, Lena sat with her allies, Martha Ellison, Sheriff Reyes, and Father O'Leary. They sat in Martha's kitchen, drinking bitter coffee. "He asked you to go to the rancheria," Martha stated. Lena nodded. "And you said no?" The older woman sighed. "Good. You would not have survived a winter, not in your soul." "So what does she do, Martha?" Father O'Leary asked, his face lined with worry. "She cannot stay here, not with him, the town. It is not ready. They see a hero now, but in a month they will see a scandal." "He is right, Chiquita," Reyes said, his voice gentle. "This town, it is a good town, but it is a hard one. I've seen this before. It is not you I worry about. It is the future. It is children." Lena flinched. her hand unconsciously going to her stomach.
A child,
Martha said, her voice practical and brutal.
born between.
That child belongs nowhere. The Apache will not claim it. The white world will not claim it. It will be a ghost, just like its father. It is a hard, hard life you are choosing. Lena, you must be sure. Lena looked at their faces. Her friends. The ones who had stood with her. They were not telling her no. They were just telling her the truth. Taza, too, sought counsel. He sat with Nantan by the fire. In the center of the Tonto Basin, the valley was safe. The white woman will not come, Nantan said. He had not asked. He knew. She is afraid. Taza said. No, the old chief said, his eyes on the flames.
She is wise. She is not Apache. A bird cannot live underwater. But you are not just a bird. Taza, you have been in the water. You have been in the fire. She wants me to live in her town, Taza said, the shame and anger rising in his throat. To be a tame man.
She does not, Nantan said.
She is afraid of caging you. She is afraid you will one day hate her for the freedom you gave up.
Taza was silent. It was the exact truth. The heart, Taza, Nantan said, does not ask the color of the skin. It asks about endurance. Can she endure your world? Can you endure hers, or can you build a new one? The solution came 3 days later, from Elias Quintero. It is a business proposition, he said, finding Lena at the school.
I have land, a small parcel. It is not part of my ranch. It is on the river, 2 miles south of town. It is in between.
Lena looked at him, her heart stopping.
It is good land, Quintero said. It has water. I need a place for my vaqueros to trade with the Apache. A real trading post. Not that thieves' den in town. I will build the house. You can run the post. Teach if you want. It is a place, not town, not the rancheria, just the river.
It was a compromise. A small, wooden house, with a large porch and a solid storehouse, built on a bend in the river. It was exactly halfway between Sagebrush Crossing and the hidden valley. She and Taza stood on the new porch. The framework was still raw, smelling of fresh-cut pine.
It is not a wiki-up,
she said, her voice small. It is not a Boston drawing room. He said, no, she said. It is just a house. He stepped up, his good arm coming around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He was still wounded, but he was strong. I will live in the valley, he said, his voice a low rumble in her ear. It is my home. Her heart sank. And, he continued, I will live here, with my wife. She turned in his arms, her eyes wide. Taza, I'm not.
You are,
he said. You wear my mother's stone. I wear your father's cross, in the eyes of your God and my spirits. We are bound. This, he gestured to the house, is our world. She would teach in the town. He would be the bridge, the new mediator, the man who brought the Apache beef and the man who brought Quintero's horses, the man who ensured the fragile truce held. They would live, not in one world, but in a new one they had built themselves, on a small patch of dirt by a river. A month later, when her wound was a dull ache and his arm was out of the sling, they rode out. They rode past the town, past the fort, and into the high canyons. They found the cave. It was just as they had left it. The air was still warm, the pool steaming in the dim light. It was a place of ghosts, of the night the war had ended and their life had begun. I am not cold this time, she whispered, standing by the pool. No, he said. Neither am I. They had brought a small bundle. It was not the ledger. That was locked in a federal vault in Prescott. It was a copy, a single page, from Lena's own hand, with the names Briggs, Maddox, the railroad, the lies, written in neat, clear script. Taza took the paper. He lit it with his flint and steel. The paper flared, the names curling into black ash. He let the ashes fall into the steaming water of the spring. It is done, he said. The war is over. The ghosts are buried. Lena nodded, a tear escaping, a tear of release, not of sorrow. He took her hand, and together they walked out of the darkness, out of the cave, and into the blinding, difficult, and brilliant light of the sun. The dust of 4 years had settled. It was a new kind of dust, not just from the desert, but from the slow, steady progress of change. Sagebrush Crossing was still a hard town, but it was no longer a desperate one. The Arizona Central Railroad, true to its word, now ran 4 miles to the south, a thin, smoky line of commerce that bypassed the sacred lands. The town grew, not with the explosive, cancerous greed of a mining boom, but with the slow, tough roots of a trading post. New buildings made of brick, not just false-fronted pine, lined the main street. The children who played in that street were different, too. They ran in a pack, a loud, healthy mix of white, Mexican, and Apache. Their games a jumble of English, Spanish, and the occasional shouted Apache word. Lena's school was the loudest building in town. The church basement was overflowing. With 27 students, Naylan and Kavi were the top of the class. Lena had hired Elias Quintero's niece, a smart young woman from Tucson, to help her teach. The town, having seen the money and peace the truce brought, had decided, for the most part, that educated children, regardless of color, were good for business. Taza was a different man. He was no longer the ghost. He was Taza, the man who spoke for the Tonto Basin. He was not a chief, but he had the ear of Nantan, and his voice carried the weight of the man who had faced down a colonel and won. He was a negotiator, a trader, a man who understood both the white man's paper and the Apache's honor. He still rode the desert, his rifle still in its scabbard, but he was no longer hunting men, or being hunted. He was moving goods, carrying messages, and, with his mere presence, keeping the fragile peace. He was the man who brought Quintero's cattle to the valley and the man who brought Nantan's word to the town. He was the bridge, and he was made of steel. Their home, the small house on the river, was the center of this new world. It was a true trading post, a place of loud, honest commerce, and a quiet, defiant peace. And it was no longer just their home. Papa, look! A small boy, no more than 3 years old, stood at the river's edge. He had Taza's black hair and Lena's bright, defiant eyes. He held up a perfectly flat, gray stone. "It is a good one. Kaya Thomas," Taza said. He knelt beside his son, his good shoulder, the one without the scar, angled toward the boy. "The wrist must be flat, like this. You are not throwing. You are letting it fly." He took the stone, and with a flick of his wrist, sent it skipping 1, 2, 3, 4 times across the water's surface. The boy, Kaya, laughed, a sound of pure delight. He turned, and in his haste, he tripped and stumbled against his father's chest. "Careful," Lena said, coming onto the porch, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. The smell of fresh bread baking in the wood stove mixed with the scent of the river. The boy's hand, seeking balance, had landed on Taza's left shoulder. His small fingers traced the puckered, ropey scar that disappeared under Taza's shirt. "Owie, Papa?" Kaya asked, his small face suddenly serious. Taza looked at the scar. He touched it, the memory no longer a fire, but a dull, distant ache. He looked up, his eyes finding Lena's. She came down the steps and sat on the riverbank, pulling her son into her lap. "Yes, my love," she said, her voice soft. "It was an owie." "Did you fall?" Kaya asked his father. Taza sat beside them, his arm coming around Lena and the child. "No, little one, I did not fall." "It was a bad man," Lena said quietly, her hand finding Taza's. "A man who wanted to take this land. A man who wanted to hurt our people." "The Pinda Lik Oyi?" Kaya asked, using the Apache word. "Some of them," Lena said. "And some of our people, too. Papa was very, very brave. He was protecting me." "And did you protect him?" Kaya asked, his wide eyes turning to his mother. Lena looked at Taza. She saw the man who had been a ghost, a warrior, a traitor, a hero. She saw the man who had been caught between 2 worlds and had, with her, built a third. "Yes," Lena said, her voice thick. "I protected him, too." Taza said nothing. He just held them, his gaze moving up from the small, beloved faces.
and looking out toward the high country. Later that week, they rode, Taza, Lena, and Kaya, strapped in a basket on the side of Lena's horse. They rode up, out of the river valley, up the winding mule track, to the top of the high mesa, the one where it had all ended. They stood on the precipice, the wind pulling at their hair. From here, they could see everything. To the east, the deep-shadowed slash of the Tonto Basin, the heart of the world, its green floor a hidden promise. A plume of smoke rising from Nantan's rancheria. To the south, the thin, distant line of the railroad, a river of iron and smoke, its whistle a faint, lonely cry on the wind. And to the west, the town of Sagebrush Crossing, a cluster of brick and wood, a compromise, a place of noise and argument and uneasy progress. The valley, Taza said, pointing. My past. The town, Lena said. My past. He pointed to the railroad. The future. No, Lena said, turning to him. She took his hand. She looked down at their son, who was asleep, safe in his basket. This is the future. He had come to this land a ghost, a man trapped between two names, pet Indian and traitor. He was a man of no people, belonging to no one. Now, he stood on this rock, a free man, a husband, a father, a man who had defined himself, not by the blood he was born with, but by the choices he had made. She had come to this land a refugee, a frightened woman running from a civilized world of lies. She was a rabbit, Taza had called her, but she had learned to be a hawk. She had stood against the system. She had fought for justice, not with a gun, but with the truth. She had chosen the hardest path, the hardest love, and she had never, for 1 second, looked back. Freedom, she had learned, was not the absence of bonds. It was the right to choose them. Justice, her father's justice, did not always come from a ledger. Sometimes it had to be won with a gun, but it could only be held by the truth and love. This fierce, stubborn love did not erase their differences. It did not make him white or her Apache. It made them a fortress, a place where those two worlds could meet and argue and hold each other. There was still hate. There were still men in town who spat when Taza rode past. There were still warriors in the valley who saw Lena as the white eyes. But that was the truth of the world. It was not a perfect, easy place, but here, in this small, brutal corner of the territory, they had written a different story. A story of a white woman and an Apache man who had looked at the war they were given and had, against all odds, chosen peace, chosen each other. They rode down, back to the river. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of fire and rose. The wind, coming down from the high country, was cool and clean. From the south, the faint, distant whistle of the 4 o'clock train. From the house, the sound of their son, waking, his small voice calling for them. Taza lifted Kaya from the basket, swinging him onto his shoulders. Lena went to the porch, to the bread that was cooling, to the life they had built. The West was still wild, a ferocious, beautiful, and unforgiving land. But here, on this small patch of dirt by the river, they had found and held on to something more stubborn than violence, more unyielding than rock, freedom, and a love that refused to die. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below to share your thoughts and say hello. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales, and to give this video a like. And please, help this story reach more people by clicking that hype button. Your support means the world to me.